we have dangerous jobs. I don't know if you guys ever feel that way, but I often do, particularly because of what we're discussing, right? I mean, when young people go to college, that's a very intense time of self-discovery, of examination, of encountering new ideas, trying on different identities. And there's a part of that is good and necessary, right? So in order for students, I think, to grow their faith and deepen their faith and it become more rooted and developed, there's kind of a risk there, right? Because asking questions, maybe moving beyond superficial answers, wrestling with difficult parts of scripture, like all of that is really important. But at the same time, there's also this, I don't know, it makes me nervous sometimes. And I catch myself sometimes either being too overprotective, like wanting to kind of, hold them back from some of those deeper questions, or to give them too easy an answer. To answer it too quickly. But at the same time, I think earlier in my career, I made the mistake of basically just seeing that process of disorientation as like, that is spiritual formation, which now I'm kind of like, oh, geez, I really think that there has to also be this process of reorientation in the middle of that. So how do you approach that? I mean, you have pastoral experience, but you're also professors. So how do you do that? How do you help students question well and wrestle well?
I think for me, I try to just be vulnerable and honest with my own questioning and doubts and wrestling, and almost not in a performative sense, but in a vulnerable, these are the questions that I've raised for myself, and here's how I came to some of the answers that I've figured out for myself. You are going to have different questions, but here's how I can model how to get to the far side of that. And then also to affirm it is okay to ask those questions. I love being a part of the honors program and being able to talk about these great texts and then sometimes get the answer wrong about what this text means. And as a professor going like, oh, I just want to tell you what it is. But they have to wrestle with it in community and think critically about what's going on there within that text, especially when it's a biblical text. I just want to give them the answer. But there is something I think beneficial, and it's even an act of faith, I think, to trust that God is at work in those students' lives beyond my time with them, and that God is going to continue to be at work in their lives and in their story beyond college, beyond the class that I'm teaching them. And so that's an act of faith on my part of, God, I pray that you would be at work in this student's life, that you continue to work and that you would help me as I fail and fumble about and try to teach well, that your Spirit would be the one that actually is at work somehow in the things that I say and don't say, so that these young people somehow come out on the far side of this college experience knowing Jesus more than they did before, even after having gone through potentially some really difficult seasons of asking questions and struggling with doubts and those types of things, that they would come out on the other side with what Paul Ricoeur calls a second naivete, like this sense of a childlike faith or wonder, but only having gone through the hard stuff of wrestling with the questions and deconstructing it in order to understand.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely resonate with this idea that it is a scary job to be in, right? Because folks, these students' hearts and minds and souls are in some ways being influenced by what we're saying or not saying, right? And so it's something that I definitely pray very regularly about, right? In terms of, Lord, be working in my students' minds and hearts, and be moving them in the ways that will be persuasive to them, right? Because I think in this postmodern moment, we can't expect that one particular approach is going to really address their questions, their doubts, and that kind of thing. So it has to be something that is a move of God's Spirit in them to show them the truth on their own in that sense, right? But I do want to come alongside them and encourage them. Like I tell the students at the beginning of the year, come to office hours with your professors if you're wrestling with certain questions that that are not brought up in class or maybe only touched on in class. Come talk to us, have coffee with us, that kind of thing, because I think the thing that I want to dispel with the students is that their doubt or their question or their deconstruction of their faith is something that only they have ever thought of. Right? But that question is probably something that like people have written volumes and volumes on, thought about for centuries, if not millennia. And I want to say, look, if you have this question, at least talk to us, because we may be able to point you to resources, right? In terms of other authors who have worked on this, maybe our own experiences with regard to like things that we've gone through in terms of how did we resolve that question for ourselves. Whereas I think oftentimes students, I've had students who come up to me and said, when I was in high school, I had these particular questions. I went to talk to my parents about it. I went to talk to my youth pastor and my pastor about them, and they had no answers. They didn't even know how to even begin answering these questions. And I think the impression that these students get when they get to college is, well, then no Christians have thought about this, so therefore Christians are stupid, and so therefore I should throw out the faith. Whereas I want them to know that, look, even if your pastor at home had no idea how to address this question, there are scholars who have probably spent their entire lives addressing this question. And it's just that you're just not aware of them. It's just not disseminated in kind of the public imagination. Whereas, this might be an active question of academic debate, right, within theology, within philosophy. And so that's the kind of impression that I want to give to the students, that they're not alone in this, right, in whatever thing that they're wrestling with. And hopefully that I can point them to resources or provide myself as a resource with regard to that question.